Hi, Miriam's eye. All right.
Got it.
And you are going to
Reading the garden.
be co-host.
Great.
You are a co-host.
How you doing? How you doing, Steve?
Like I was telling Marcia, it's not a pleasant experience.
No. Hi, how you doing?
Morning.
Are you surviving?
I am surviving, but it's been brutal.
Really?
Yeah, hi.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody.
You're,
I'm
you're
here.
smile. You're
I'm
smiling.
smiling, you know, what else could I do?
Well,
I
yeah,
mean,
you just have to
it is what it is.
truck through
Can
it.
I help in any way?
Well, no, not really, unless you want to take me to the bathroom.
Commiserate is all you can do.
Ah,
Bernie, what is this thing about a magnesium ball or something burning in the skies of
Good
Colorado?
morning, Benita.
Benita, hi, good morning.
Morning, everybody.
Hi.
Hello.
Good morning, Shirley.
Morning.
It's a
Good
beautiful
morning,
morning.
Bernie.
Good morning.
Hi, Riva.
Hello. Hi, Miriam, happy to see you back.
Thank you very much. I'm
And
happy to be
Benita?
back.
It's good to see
Wonderful.
you here. We're glad you're joining us.
What?
I said, I was talking to Bernita
Oh,
about having her joining us. It's very pleasant to have you.
Thank you. It's my first time.
Yes, we're glad to have you here.
I'm outside and I'm trying to figure out where to plug in this ear thing. Oh, I got it.
You know,
I'm gonna try to, because I'm outside. Okay.
Okay, well, might as well enjoy the temperatures, my goodness.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Great.
Hi, B, it's good to see you back.
thank you.
Hi, Nan.
Hi, Miriam.
Hi, thank you for calling me.
Oh, good. And Jan got a copy of the Jewish News for you, so
Oh, good, good.
she'll be bringing it by. So,
Oh, good.
yes, if anybody
Thank
is
you.
wondering, our Miriam is a Jewish news star. There was an article from the Jewish Family and Services program about
Oh, nice.
all that Miriam does. And when I turned the page and I saw the picture, before I even saw the headline, I said, I know that lady. So I called Miriam yesterday and she hadn't seen the article. She knew it was coming. So I was going to cut it out of my newspaper before I recycled it and just mail it to her. But Jan came by the temple yesterday and picked up a copy.
Good.
Well, that's good. I'll get it from her. Thank
Yes,
you.
you will.
So you're famous now.
Yeah. Thank you.
Infamous. Either famous or
haven't even
infamous,
seen
whichever
it.
you prefer.
It's better. Famous is better than being infamous.
Yeah. Oh, but not as exciting.
Yeah.
Hi, Sharon.
Sure, you see
I'm
you,
about to start
lady.
Torah study. I can't talk.
Ray isn't here yet.
And I hope to be at the other meeting too, the book club meeting.
Yeah.
Oh, good. The Goldathon? October
So I'm
20th?
reading Golda.
Good. Yeah, we're getting a good turnout for the Goldathon.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah.
Rabbi, are you coming to the Goldathon?
Oh, me?
Are you coming to the Goldathon, Rabbi? The book club?
Yes. Yes. Golda Meir and I were good friends.
Harvey used to tell me. he
I saw the
remembered
movie.
She came to town in Chicago and the whole Jewish population turned out to see her.
Wow,
And he was,
very nice.
I
was a
saw
little
the
kid.
movie. I saw the movie at Jan's house and it really follows the book very, very well.
Good morning, everyone. Let's get started.
Okay.
Let's do the blessing first. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
Golan,
asher kadishanu
Shalom.
It's Yvonne. Blessed
Blessed are you,
Adonai our
Lord
God,
God, through the
ruler
world.
of the world. You sanctified
Sanctify
us
us with your commandments,
and
commanded us to
keep
speak in the words of Torah.
We want to welcome Benita to our group.
you.
This
Thank
is
you.
our first time. You want to introduce yourself and tell us where you're from and how long you've been with the temple and all that stuff.
Okay, well, I used to belong to the temple when we first moved to Phoenix, but we've been here almost 30 years,
Oh, wow.
and we've been in Sun City 20 of those 30. And not much we came from Chicago, like everybody else. And so I love it here. You know, I'm
Yeah.
not thrilled about the summers, but other than that, yeah, who is? So
That's
Yeah.
true. Well, thank you very much for joining us. And Rabbi, I'll let you begin.
Well, let me follow up Anita's comment. How many people here are from Chicago? Raise your hands. Only one. How many are
That's
from
me.
New York? 1, 2. How many are from 3? How many are from anywhere in the Midwest? How many are from California?
Hi, good morning.
How many are from Arizona?
All of us
Okay.
are from
How
Arizona.
many are from the Northeast?
3 from Connecticut, or maybe 4.
Yeah, me. Do I count?
Sure.
Okay. I'm a transplant to Connecticut when I was 14. But
Oh,
my
wow.
grandparents were from there, but we lived in a very blue collar city, Waterbury, not the Greenwiches of Connecticut by a very far margin, but still Connecticut. So good morning, everyone. How are you doing?
Good.
Okay, good. Nice to see everyone bright and early at this 11 o'clock hour. And
How about 1 o'clock? How about 1 o'clock? 1 o'clock where
All
I am.
right, Alabama surely is at 1 p.m. in Alabama. And I'm switching from coffee. This is Earl Grey tea, but I put the whipped milk on it anyway. So I'm trying a new drink. Today we're talking about the Tower of Babel. And the reason I chose that, it is reading 3 Perek Gimel beginning on page 33, is that, as you know, we're doing a course on Noah. So I figured we would avoid Noah because we're already handling that elsewhere. How many are in the Noah group? Oh, a lot. Okay, like 5 of you or 6 of you. So, so we're skipping Noah this year, even though it is Parshat Noah. The portion of this week is 95% Noah. And then at the very end, there's 8 or 9 sentences thrown in about the Tower of Babel. And so because it's so short, Harvey Fields' comment, Benita, do you have these readings?
No, I don't.
Is it possible that somebody could send it to her now, or is that too late anyway? But anyway, every week we get a reading from Harvey Fields that you can either show on your computer or print out. And Harvey Fields today, his comments on Tower of Babel are rather short. They're just front and back. And it's Perek Gimel. It's the third of his comments because this is a very small section at the end of the portion. So therefore, I sent to you, or Riva sent to you at my request, a little bit from Wikipedia, which actually gives you some quotes from some additional Second Temple sources. And if we have the time and the interest, we can look at that. I also include a section from the Encyclopedia Judaica second edition. And all of that is in a second reading, which is combined. Okay, any questions or problems? Good morning, Rochelle. How are you?
I am well, thank you.
And how's
I'm
Justin?
glad you're drinking tea. Tea is good for you.
Okay. Well, it's part of my diet. I'm down now pretty close to 20 pounds in the last year. Good morning, Miriam. Your turn. You have to unmute. You have to unmute, Miriam. There you
Okay,
go.
okay, I have a question. This Tower of Babel, I wonder if for some reason the people who wrote it or whatever felt they had to have a reason for the differentiation of languages.
Mhm.
And this was their reason for it. And I kept thinking about it because why would you send people all over? Where would they learn the language? And it just didn't make sense to me.
Well, it's a good question, Miriam, and I think I can actually answer this one. So this is what they call in biblical studies an etiological story. So etiology is, you use it in medicine as well, this word. And etiology is when you're trying to figure out the source of a reason for something. So in this case, the people in the biblical times wanted to figure out the reason for certain things. And they didn't have the access to modern medicine. As you know, nowadays in modern America, everyone is rational and reasonable and logical and thoughtful, right? We don't have
Yeah, I
anyone.
got to talk
Sure.
to for my son. He
We-
said medicine is not like it used to be when my husband practiced. And remember that.
It's true. So it's not like today. So thousands of years ago, they saw not just the Israelites, but other groups in the ancient Near East. They saw, hey, there's different groups speaking different languages with different cultures. How do you explain this? So the Tower of Babel is one such attempt to explain it, right?
Right.
And it also accomplishes certain other things. But the lessons you draw from it could be quite different, as you saw in just the few commentaries that Harvey Fields brings, and they're very eclectic, ranging over many hundreds of years and with very different approaches. The lessons you learn from the Tower of Babel are also quite different. But the story is similar to the Noah's Ark in that it's a great story that you can teach children, and as you grow up, you can take that story and reinterpret it over the course of your life. So what the Tower of Babel meant to me when I first heard it as a child, I don't recall my mother reading me this story, although maybe she did. I remember the Noah's Ark. We had a whole book, children's book, Noah's Ark, and with great pictures. And this is before PJ Library. Now, if you have children or grandchildren, they can get a free Jewish book with pictures every month from PJ Library. And so I don't know. I don't even know if you have to be a child. You can just sign up. But in those days, they didn't have that. So my parents had to buy these books. Can you believe that? And but these are two of the stories that I think I remember very clearly. And I think almost all of us, regardless of whether we were raised in a more religious home or a less religious home, if we were raised Jewish or not Jewish, I mean, pretty much even American or Indonesian. I mean, I would think everyone around the world, almost everyone, would be exposed to these. Everyone who's raised in a country where there's a Western monotheistic religion. I don't think the Buddhists and the Hindus, they've got their own mythologies. So I'd use these two words to answer Miriam's questions. Mythology. Mythology in religious studies does not necessarily mean it's not true. It's right. So I'm not saying it's a myth, meaning that, oh, it's just a stupid story that's not true. Mythology just means it's a story which is passed on from generation to generation and has meaning for us. It has meaning for us whether it's true or not. And at this point, it doesn't really matter if it's true. In this case, they've actually found the tower they think the story was based on. So both Noah's Ark and Tower of Babel turns out have some degree of truth to them, but that doesn't make any difference. They're still part of our mythology in a good way. The second thing is they're etiological stories, meaning that the story helps us to explain something that we
They do.
wonder about. Okay, thanks, Miriam,
Thank
and
you.
welcome back. Marcia, any comments or questions at this point? You have to unmute.
Marcia, after.
Oh, I got it.
You look very elegant with your scarf
Oh, yeah.
and the peach colored shirt. It's
Thank
very
you. I
elegant.
decided to be colorful and not wear black. Okay.
And no one told me we had to dress for Torah study.
You can comb my hair.
Yeah, well, Pam, you can dress up when we go to the Mormon temple next week.
Okay. Are you going to the Mormon temple?
Yeah, Pam and I are going. But they're
I've been to the
rededicating-
one in San Diego when they were redoing the carpeting. They allowed the public to
Ah,
come in
that's
because they were
awesome.
going to have to reconsecrate anyhow. So it was quite interesting. You'll see all the stars of David all over inside of it. Anyway, I'm looking at, this is kind of off the wall, it's talking about in the papers that Reva sent us, it says in the Agada, and they're talking about Nimrod, the rebel in here.
This is from the third reading, the Encyclopedia Judaica, I believe, right?
The Tower of Babel, yeah. And
What page?
3 of 5 I have.
Okay, in the Agada, yeah, in the bottom of page 3. So this is the third reading at the bottom of that extra PDF.
So Nimrod, it says somewhere elsewhere in here is the son of Ham.
Yeah.
And I watched that movie about Noah yesterday.
Oh, just to interrupt you, the movie with Russell Crowe, Noah, is on Amazon Prime for another 5 days. So if you have Amazon Prime and you want to watch it, as I said, it's not an entertaining movie in the classical sense. It's not like fun, but if you've been following, the details of Noah, it's a very interesting modern interpretation by one of the big Hollywood filmmakers.
You might want to fact check it a little bit, but anyway.
Well, that's the whole point. It's an alternative interpretation and explanation. It's very similar to what you might have found among the Dead Sea Scrolls.
So Nimrod's the son of Ham.
Right.
And you can see at the very beginning of this movie, there's something dicey about Ham, and there's going to be trouble down the line. Now, Nimrod is the one who wanted to build this tower, I should say.
According to some stories.
Okay, well, just.
In other stories, he was against it, so it
So-
depends.
Oh, really? Because it seems that he's carrying on this conflict with God, or what, we had a conflict with his father, now he's got a conflict with God. He seems to be of a line of people who are the troublemakers.
Right, and this is again an etiological idea that there's always got to be somebody who's going to try to cause trouble, in this case, trying to destroy the world or to conquer the heavens. And there was a midrash that is in one of these readings, I think, where the Nimrod soldiers started shooting arrows up into the heavens to try to see what would happen. The arrows fell back down filled with blood. So from this, Nimrod and his soldiers deduced that they could conquer heavens. If the angels up there were being shot by arrows and bleeding, then a full-scale invasion might work. So this is one of the many midrashic spins on this. So a lot of this comes from the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it was not in the classical rabbinic tradition, as I would call it. Barry, comment, or Sai, comment? Barry.
No, you're doing just fine without me, Rabbi.
Okay, Cy? No, okay. If Barry and Cy are both happy, that's a good sign. Okay, so let's take a read. We'll start on page 33 on the left-hand column. What went wrong at the Tower of Babel? Benita, if you don't have the reading, you can just listen along and we read it out loud. So that should be pretty good. Who would like to start us off? Okay, Pam.
What went wrong at the Tower of Babel? Torah tells us that after the flood, people moved eastward and settled in the land of Shinar. They decided to build a city for themselves and a migdal, a tower that reached up to the heavens. Let's make a name for ourselves, they said to one another, or we will be scattered all over the earth. Seeing the city and the tower they were building, God decided to do what the people had feared. If, as one person with one language for all, this is how you've begun to act. God reasoned that nothing that they may propose to do will be out of their reach. For that reason, God scattered them throughout the world and made them speak different languages. The city where this all took place was named Babel, which means confused or mixed up. That seems to be an appropriate description of an entire episode, as it raises several questions. What was wrong with the people building a migdal, a tower? Wouldn't we be better off if people spoke one language? Wouldn't that have improved communication and perhaps the chances for human cooperation and peace?
Okay, stop for a minute. So in Israel today, if you go to Tel Aviv, you can buy an apartment if you have several $1 million in Migdal Ariel. So skyscrapers in Tel Aviv usually have the name Migdal, which means tower. So a Migdal is just a big, tall building of any sort. The word Bavel, or Tower of Babel, is from the verb libalbel. So ani bilbalti, I got confused, or I mixed things up, and that's in modern Hebrew. And so right from the name of the tower, you get the idea that there's a certain concept behind it to become confused. But what exactly is their confusion, and what is the lesson that you're supposed to learn? And not, commentators disagree wildly on what you're supposed to learn from this. Other comments, we just read kind of the introduction. So yes, Miriam, unmute.
Miriam, you have to unmute.
Okay, does the word Babel that we have now come from that?
I believe it does, yes. The word in English, Babel,
Right,
I believe from the Hebrew balbel, I
Yeah.
believe.
that's what I wondered about.
You know, proving that one word comes from another language is, you know, something you'd have to really research extremely carefully in philology, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Mhm.
Now, there was a country later, Babylonia, right, which comes from the same root.
Right,
Now, it could be that the country of Babylonia already existed when the Israelites came up with the story, and they're trying to mock the Babylonians, right? So it's like if we were to come up with a story now, using the word Canada as a people who are, you know, confused or stupid or, you know, so then we'd say, oh, there's this ancient story about a place called Canada where everyone's really stupid. And then, you know, everybody would be wink, wink. It's kind of like, you know, so
Yeah.
it may be that there already was a Babylonia, and the Israelites are kind of, now whether this is good natured, you know, humor, or whether this is trying to be, you know, really serious, it's not not clear. But the Bible does a lot of this sort of satire, so it wouldn't be out of the question for the Bible to be, you know, poking fun at some group or another, you know. So as has already been pointed out, the lineages already indicate, you know, certain things about certain groups, and Nimrod's ancestors were already implicated in some unsavory activities of unspecified types. So it's just good that we don't have any of these problems in Sun City, Arizona.
Not yet.
Rochelle, I'm joking.
Okay, yeah, because I had some of my most interesting calls on my ambulance went into Sun City, Arizona. Most of it was alcohol and medication mixing, but yeah.
I'm sure there's a wider variety of vices and corruption as well. Okay, we come to our first comment from a commentator called Abravanel, and Dan Yitzchak Abravanel is a very interesting commentator. Does anybody know about him? I have mentioned him very briefly a couple of times. Barry, you know anything about Abravanel? You have to unmute.
Okay, I don't know anything about him, but to be honest with you, I don't know what source you're reading from at this point. I opened up all the attachments that were sent to me, and I haven't the slightest idea where any of this is.
There were two attachments. The first one is from Harvey Field, and that should say Parshat Noah. And if you turn to page 33 in that, you should be able to see a little picture of Abravanel on the right side. Then there was a second PDF, which had at the top later developments. And I think Riva wrote a little sentence in writing saying this is from Wikipedia. Do you see those two PDFs?
Yeah, I got it now. Thank you.
Okay,
Sorry to
page
bother everybody.
33.
But I still don't know anything about.
Okay,
the guy
everybody
you're talking
now.
about.
Everybody knows where we are now. Okay, good. So Abravanel is famous not only for his later writings, but for his earlier career. He was a Spanish Jew in the late 1400s. Now, what happened in the late 1400s?
Inquisition.
Okay, Inquisition. And what else happened in the late 1400s?
Plague.
Columbus sailed the ocean blue.
Correct. And what year was that?
1942.
1492.
1492. And what happened
1492. I
in the
gotta say.
same, what happened in that very same year, in fact, virtually on the same day as Columbus sailing?
Somebody got,
They excommunicated the Jews, didn't they?
Thank you.
okay.
All the Jews in Spain had 3 months to either convert to Christianity, to Catholicism, or leave the country. And the 3 months were up on the very day that Columbus was set to sail. I believe that he postponed sailing by a day or two so that he wouldn't be sailing on the same day, because he thought that would be very bad luck. We're not exactly sure Columbus's own background, but he clearly was sympathetic with the Jews. So Abravanel was a Spanish Jew right up to the time of the expulsion. Not only that, he was the Minister of Finance in the government. So he was one of the 2 or 3 chief economic advisors to the Queen, Isabella, who was a tremendous religious bigot and extremist. And but she worked very nicely with Abravanel for quite a long time. Now, there were other Jews who were at the highest level of the government, and many of them converted to Catholicism rather than leave. Abravanel did not do that. Although there was a story that he was offered by the Queen a one-person exemption, that he could be the only practicing Jew allowed to stay in Spain. He didn't think that was a very good idea to take up an offer like that. So anyway, he left. He left with all the other people who were not converting. We don't know exactly the precise numbers. Prime Minister Netanyahu's father, Ben-Zion Netanyahu, spent his career writing about this. And he wrote a very big book, like 800 pages, on the origins of the Inquisition, in which he said that pretty much every Jew who converted to Catholicism stopped practicing Judaism. That when the Inquisition was was arresting people for being secretly not faithful to Catholicism, that this was based almost entirely on dislike of the origins of these people rather than the actual fact that they were secretly practicing Judaism. So he's kind of extreme. His interpretations are kind of extreme in that way, because that can't be logically exactly that way, because people were leaving Portugal 250 years after the Portuguese Inquisition started and going to France and other places and returning to Judaism 250 years later. So, there must have been something. But in support of Netanyahu, a lot of these people testified that they really hadn't been practicing Judaism, but the Inquisition came to them because of their names and because of their Jewish origins and accused them of stuff. And then once they were accused of stuff, they started getting interested in what they were accused of doing anyway. So the Inquisition in some ways had the counterintuitive impact of making people who were not interested in Judaism interested in Judaism. And I think you can see that from your point of view, is that in the West Valley, we have a very low percentage of practicing Jews, very low. If there was more anti-Semitism, right, if the neo-Nazis marched through downtown Glendale, you'd see a lot of these people suddenly showing interest in Judaism, right? Because, the threat somehow brings out your sense of identity somehow. And there'd be all these non-Jews interested in converting as well. So, extremisms push people in different directions. Miriam, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to say something. There are still some people I know who say that they're way back. It came down to them that they're now Catholic. It came down to them that there were in their family Jews, even now.
Yeah. And so there's, even 500 years later, there's still, residual impacts of the Inquisition.
Yeah.
And years ago, I was working on a series of papers on the Jews of Cuba. And I did, Fidel Castro it was suggested that he had Jewish origins on both his father, by different people on his father or mother's side. So I got an appointment with the historian of the city of Havana, Eusebio Leal, the big Cuban historian, most famous Cuban historian. So I went in to see him. I had to wait a long time to get this 10 minutes. And I said to him, does Fidel Castro have Jewish ancestry? So I guess this is considered confidential. So he knows the answer, but he wouldn't tell me. But so what he said to me, well, it's probable because he was a Spanish Jew And most Spanish people had Jewish ancestry, which of course was not really my question. I asked him, I wanted to know, does he have any specific information about recent Jewish origins, like, his grandparents or parents? But the answer is true. There were so many Jewish people who were converted forcibly or otherwise to Catholicism in Spain and Portugal that pretty much everybody there has some background of that type. So Abravanel then leaves Spain. He'd been the minister of the treasury there, and he ends up in Italy, which is a good place to go. He was lucky he didn't go to Portugal. And in Italy, he doesn't really get a good job. So he does what a lot of people are doing because of COVID. He takes early retirement. And, because he'd been a big shot in Spain, I guess he had enough money and his 401k was doing well. So he then starts writing books on Judaism, including a commentary on the Torah. And this is our commentary that we're looking at. He likes asking the big questions. There's a picture, there's a little drawing there of what the artist imagined that Abravanel looked like. I don't know if that looked like him. Is that a hand, Barry? No. Okay. Okay, who'd like to read? Pam, you want to keep going?
Sure. Abravanel, a counselor to the kings and queens in Spain and Portugal, explained that before they began building the tower, people had lived at peace with one another. They shared everything equally and generously. But as soon as they began building, they started to argue bitterly with one another. They disagreed over who would bake the bricks, who would carry them, and who would place them on the tower. Each one wanted credit for laying the first brick on a new level, for the design, for choosing the color, and for organizing the work. The project of building the tower made people jealous of one another. It caused them to hate one another. They became more interested in competing for fame than cooperating for the good of the whole human community. As a result, God destroyed the tower and scattered them throughout the world.
All right, stop. Does this seem like a reasonable explanation? What have you any experience with similar sequences of events, or is this completely counterintuitive? Bernie?
Well, yes and no.
Talking to the microphone.
Let me do this, man. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, in a way, I hate to bring politics into this, but
be careful.
I see a lot of the previous administration in this description here. No more comment on that.
Repeat yourself.
I see a lot of the previous administration in this last paragraph.
So how does that relate to the tower? So in other words, here you have a project. I would think that if you have a project, that would bring people together. But you think that a project can also cause people to fight among themselves.
Well, they all want credit and they're sucking up to the boss and etc.
And you're going to blame that on the boss himself or herself, that you need a leader who helps people work together in a peaceful manner?
Yeah, rather than a boss who pits everybody against each other.
So certain bosses can deliberately cause the underlings to be competitive and fight with each other. And other bosses can say, now play nicely and let's all get this done. But Abravanel, at least in Harvey Field's rendition, doesn't mention the boss at all, right? He just says they start fighting. Sigh. And then B.
Sorry, you have to unmute.
Sai?
Unmute.
He's not unmuted.
Sai, you have to unmute. Okay, Pam or Riva or Marsha? Riva.
Yeah, I have a lot of trouble before with the first sentence in this paragraph. Before they began building the tower, people had lived in peace with one another. They shared everything equally and generously. I don't know if you've ever lived in that world, but I never have. And I think that's sort of, sort of a real gloss on the past.
Well, this is right after the flood. So it's talking about a short period where people are so terrified that God is going to bring another flood that might have encouraged them to be nice, not because they were such nice people, but because there was still all this residual stuff from the flood and people, how everybody drowned. I don't know if that helps your case, Riva. Marsha?
I think what you're saying, Rabbi.
Marsha, then Barry.
What?
Marsha, then Barry.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said. I talked over you. It's sort of what happened after 9/11 in this country. There was a great unification because of the horror of the Twin Tower bombings and other bombings. And so people did work together, but it didn't last a long time. So I think Riva's probably right. They're just so long that this can go on,
I mean, Shirley, were you in the Gulf Coast at the time of the big hurricane and flood? What was it called? Katrina. Yeah, you have to unmute. But after Katrina, yeah, there you go. Okay.
You talking about Katrina?
Yeah, were you there?
Oh, yeah.
Did people unify after Katrina?
Did they what?
Did they unify? Did they all work together? Were they all peaceful and harmonious?
Not really. Not really. I mean, there were some people, of course, but not what should be.
Okay, Barry.
Yeah, I'm just curious about putting all this in a time frame from the time of the flood. How long is it before the tower gets started or built?
I don't know.
Because I was under the impression, I'm going to look it up because I know I have a timeline in my Chumash, that Noah and Abraham lived pretty much at the same, not at the same time.
Right.
The end of Noah's life, the beginning of Abraham's life. That they were on the planet at the same time.
Yeah, I've seen in some of the Midrashim that Abraham was around at the time of the Tower of Babel. He was just
okay. But then you go to the Tower of Babel. So let's put that somewhere in the middle. And where do all these people come from? It's the same thing after the Garden of Eden.
Well, this is a story. This is not, I mean, I wouldn't take this literally as history. So I'm not really concerned with, all this, we're worrying about where the people came from. I'm just, they're just there. It's
just there. Yeah, they just popped up. But yeah, no, it's just interesting from a time standpoint. Yeah, it can't be taken literally, obviously. But yet you say that there's archaeological evidence that they may have found it. So
yeah,
something
there is a ziggurat in Babylonia that most historians believe is the one that the Bible is specifically referring to. Now, how they know that, I'm not sure, but there apparently is a historical basis for this specific story. Bernie.
According to page 29, there's about a half a dozen generations between Noah and Abraham. So there couldn't have been that many years between the flood and the Tower of Babel.
So a half a dozen generations, that's certainly enough time for things to change, but it's close enough that people's memories of the event are still, relatively fresh through oral transmission. Remember, there's no internet, there's no written history books that could be printed. Rochelle.
Yeah, on regards to where it starts saying how once the tower began to be built, they started to argue about who would get credit for what. And I stop and I think about this. One of the things that comes to my mind is Edison and Tesla.
Oh.
Those two basically almost went through the same type of argument. They were, working with one another, and then suddenly one wanted credit for one thing and one wanted credit for another. They began backstabbing, the whole 9 yards. And kind of think of electricity, how important it was to moving us forward. Kind of almost the same, in my opinion, it's almost the same type of behavior, the same thing that happened then happened very recently and with us. I'm sure in many other ways, but that's one that really comes to mind.
Good comparison.
Sai.
So you have to unmute. Use the chat feature if you can't unmute. Type your answers or questions.
But at the bottom left part of your screen, the very bottom left corner, there should be a mute button that you can click and unclick.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are. Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, one of the things that we all have to be aware of is that all these stories were written by individuals, and they were probably written at different times, so that it is possible that the story of the Tower of Babel could have been written after the flood, after the story of the flood, and the editors put it together another way. And this goes on, in my opinion, all the time in the Bible, because the Bible, the length of the Bible in terms of years is so great that there must have been hundreds and hundreds of people making contributions to the stories. And finally, when it got to be edited, who was to say what was first and who was to say what was number two?
So what would the implications be? So, what does that mean in terms of the point here that they were getting along well and then they weren't?
You make the crime to fit the action, if you will. You've got something going, someone has written something, now you want to make a story about it. And then somebody else 100 years later reads this and he makes a story about it. And I think this is what happens on an ongoing basis in the Bible.
But does Abravanel's idea that they were getting along and then once they started this big building project, they start fighting, does that strike you as a reasonable hypothesis?
No, because this is we're talking about, from the first description, we're talking about a huge building. And so this takes a lot of people, and a lot of people take supervision. And what would they be fighting about? Because one body had to carry some bricks to the left and another one had to carry bricks to the right, and so forth and so on. This gets to be another story. That's my feeling.
Let's take an example of creating a temple.
One thing I want to add.
Okay,
the reason
Barry.
for all this, it's just ego. Of course,
All
this
right.
is plausible. Man comes with ego, his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclinations. That's why this is plausible. They started a project and didn't get along.
Yetzer hara is the evil inclination. And so there's the idea in rabbinic thinking that there is a good inclination and a bad inclination. And we have to choose, obviously, the good inclination. Miriam.
There are always people who are against what is going on.
Right. And I saw in the, and I'm going to be very careful to stick with Bernie's policy of avoiding politics too much, but there was an article a couple of days ago, a poll showed that almost 50% of Americans want to split the country into two, a red country and a blue country. And I thought, well, that would be completely useless because the way that there's two groups now that hate each other, as soon as you make these two countries, you think that the red country is going to stay all united and the blue country stay all united. No, each of those two countries will split into two groups again. Within 5 or 10 years, you'll have two groups in each of those two countries that hate each other. And then what are you going to do? Split the country again and again and again, because it's a natural thing. There's always going to be opposition. You can't have uniform acceptance for very long. It just doesn't work. What you can do is learn how to work through conflict and disagreement in a relatively mature and thoughtful and not too confrontational way. And then be prepared to execute the people that won't cooperate. Rochelle. She's ignoring.
No, I'm just agreeing with what you're saying. I think that and I love the story of Babel. I didn't learn about it till I was probably a teenager. But I love it. And yeah, there'll always be opposition, but there needs to be opposition. It's just the way you handle that opposition that makes it productive or not.
Correct. Okay, Marcia.
So
Marcia
I had heard that it was the arguing that went on that made God create all these languages and split people into different areas, etc., and speak different languages. But then I hear the story that it was because of the chutzpah that they had, that think that if they built the tower high enough, that they would be able to reach the heavens and to be one with the gods. So which way is it?
Oh, there's several different, completely different interpretations. So you're just telling me two different viewpoints.
Are there more?
Yeah. But they're not meant to be reconciled. One commentator will say, we'll interpret it one way. Another commentator interprets it a completely different way. You either go with A or B. You can't do both because they're, almost opposite. So it's a good thing that you can interpret this story in, multitude of ways.
Well, what does the Torah say?
Well, this is commentaries on the Torah. We don't care anymore what the Torah says. We care what the commentators say. Viva.
Yeah, I think the commentaries are, I'm with Cy in terms of really not taking any of this literally. And I know some of the rest of you feel that way too, but I think the commentaries are interesting because they speak from our ancestors, how they saw the world when they were alive and the culture that they lived in. So Abravanel, however you say it. Abravanel spoke to his period of time around the Inquisition, and with his apparently high status, although it seems like he had to get out at some point. So I think it speaks to the commentaries, the people who are making those commentaries and how they see the world. I think that in itself is interesting.
Now, you make a point that I didn't really explicitly address. Does this commentary of Abravanel show any influence of his personal experience having to leave Spain? And
sure,
it has to.
So
it wouldn't be an intelligent commentary without without experience on it.
So he's basically, you know, Isabella was trying for decades to unite Spain, right? So each section of Spain, you know, what is now Spain, she was able to throw the Muslims out and to make a deal with Portugal and so forth. So 1492 was the final unification of Spain, and that's when Jews got thrown out. So basically he's saying, as soon as Isabella succeeded in uniting everybody, that's when everything fell apart and people started hurting other people. And so basically Abravanel's saying it's better to be, you know, in little groups and disunified, then everyone can do their own thing in peace rather than having one big unified group, because then things can get really worse.
Sure, it's just a metaphor for what he's experiencing.
You go back and look historically, every country that has expelled the Jews has failed, eventually failed.
Interesting. So, yeah, and they said that the economic damage of what the Spanish government did in the 15th century, especially the expulsion of Jews and other policies that they, you know, eventually made both Spain and Portugal, you know, today they're poor, you know, they're relatively poor European countries, whereas before they were the number one and number two countries in the whole world, really. If you look at the third reading, it's labeled Tower of Babel. It comes at the end of the later developments, the second PDF. You'll see on the first page what I was talking about in terms of the actual connection to what the Tower of Babel is considered a ziggurat. At the bottom of the first page, it says, the particular ziggurat described here was formerly identified with the Tower of Azida, the temple of the god Nebo in Bo-Sippa, a town southwest in Babylon. However, the discovery at the end of the 9th century of Esagila, the great temple of Marduk in Babylon, has led most scholars to agree that it is the tower of this temple which inspired the writer of Genesis 11. This ziggurat, which was called Temenanka, house of the foundation of heaven and earth, rose to a height of about 300 feet and contained two sanctuaries, one at its base, which was 300 feet square, and one at its summit. The tower was probably constructed at the time of Hammurapi, but was damaged and destroyed and repaired by Asahadon, 7th century BCE, and Nebuchadnezzar II, 6th century BCE, among others. It is interesting to note the Babylonians believed that Esagila was built by the gods, thus making the statement in Genesis 11:5, quote, which the sons of men had built, particularly meaningful, since it may be understood as a polemic against this belief. So it appears that many historians, or most historians, believe that this is the actual model for the Tower of Babel in the Bible, and that the writers of the Bible are kind of mocking this group and saying that these Babylonians believe that the gods built this tower, and that's ridiculous. It was built by these men and they couldn't even get along. Rochelle.
It's also to note, as far as the different languages, that from what I understand in Egyptian times, that the higher echelons actually spoke a language that the lower echelons did not speak. They were never taught it, which kind of put them above and beyond. Right. And also that this also happened in Catholicism, that the priests and bishops and things all knew Latin, but the common people were never taught such. They were also never taught to read for the most part. They just weren't given the education. So I'm thinking at this point, I wonder if that's something that also gave some sort of influence.
Interesting, yes, and that's very true. And today, you know, we live in a country where pretty much everybody, you know, educated, not educated, high ranking, low ranking, speak one language. And, you I was shocked when I was in Israel and I saw that these journalists for big companies like AP and New York Times that were coming to Israel, they didn't speak Hebrew. And then I saw their reporting from the West Bank about the Arabs, and I began to realize they don't speak Arabic. And so they're using these translators and they're writing these articles and they have no idea what they're, the people could be standing in front of them saying, the stupid American, let's tell them this. And then the translator translates this. And I couldn't believe that this is standard practice among all the different newspapers and TVs. I just couldn't. And diplomats, you have these very high-ranking diplomats and your special envoy to China, and the person speaks exactly one language, English, not a word of Chinese. And you'd think that you would want people, but it's but in medieval and ancient worlds, this was not true. So the elite spoke, certain language and maybe wrote. I mean, this was true in Israel as well, right? So when we're talking about the Torah, this is something that could be written and read by a very small elite. And in some ways, we're going back to that in American Judaism, where in our congregation, we have a handful of people who can read Hebrew. Riva.
Yeah, just a couple comments. One is, if you haven't seen the movie Lost in Translation, see if you can ever find a copy. It is absolutely hilarious. It's a story of a man who's in Japan trying to make some money. And it is a beautiful commentary between how he's interpreting what he's hearing, what the interpreters are saying, and what the Japanese hear. It's funny, and there's a great deal of truth to it. My second point, maybe a little more meaningful, is that during these periods where this part of the world were building these huge structures, it was done with a huge amount of cheap labor, mostly slaves or people who are very, very poorly provided. And the death rate was very, very high. None of this construction was going out without a lot of death and destruction of a lot of people.
That's not mentioned here at all, yes. But, yeah, I mean, I have a friend who wants to do a construction project on his house in the Catskills, and he's worried about people falling off ladders. And so imagine the Tower of Babel, how many people fell off ladders. Okay, let's move on.
I don't think he needed to have a bond, worry about that. They weren't worrying about it back then. Fell off, you fell off, You
don't think they had ancient insurance companies?
They weren't indemnified.
We'll find in some cave the first Israelite insurance company dating from 2,500 years ago. Rochelle.
Just a comment on what Marcia had just said. They actually did, back in Egyptian times, they did compensate people's family and things, depending on what social status they stood, if they died during work or something like that. And I believe it also had happened in Sparta and a few other cultures at that time. I know it's irrelevant. I just wanted to bring that up, that actually it was kind of going on.
So there was a system, and the Bible too speaks of compensation under certain situations. And this is particularly relevant for the discussion of abortion, because abortion's not mentioned in the Bible, except there's one place, I think in Leviticus, where a pregnant woman is accidentally hit in her stomach and loses the child. And that the Bible says you should compensate her a certain amount. And to this, this is interpreted by most later authorities that this means that the Bible is not looking at the fetus as a full human, because if it was, then this would be involuntary manslaughter, whereas it's compensated for as if it was, losing a thumb or something like that. Marcia and then Nan.
Well, I guess when I'm thinking about it, though, they do say, you know, they provide for the widow and orphans, etc. in the Bible, and you were supposed to do that as a community, whatever. So there was community insurance, I suppose, at that point, right?
Yeah, so that's I guess like a food stamp system, you know, to make sure that people who can't earn enough can still get enough food so they're not going around half starving. Barry, is that a hand? Nan and Barry in that order. Sorry. Nan.
From the comment you made regarding Leviticus, to me, that's just compensation for like a miscarriage or an accidental loss.
Right.
I mean, I think your term of abortion, though, was used incorrectly, because abortion is the deliberate termination. And
Okay,
that's,
well,
I mean, and if we're getting technical about it, but there are a lot of Jewish rabbis, though, who cite things that say, you know, it should be allowed. And this is for a discussion on another day, because it can be very, you know.
Okay, let me clarify that just a
Okay.
little bit, is that if you were trying to figure out what is the Jewish views with an S on abortion, one of the sources you would look at is this, because even though it's not abortion, it involves the loss of a fetus. And so therefore it is relevant to a discussion of abortion, even though it's not a case of abortion. Sorry, Nan, let me correct that.
Oh, okay, thank you.
No, real clearly, there's a passage that says an eye for an eye.
Right.
And basically what the Midrashes tell us is that's really, doesn't literally mean one eye for one eye. It's not supposed to be taken literally, but what it's teaching us is there should be just compensation for injury.
Right.
So there is compensation built into our Torah. Some think it's the workers' compensation passage, but I don't know.
And if the Torah were to have written, if you lose an eye, you get compensated 5 shekels, then, you know, 5 shekels will devalue, and then, you know, for 500 years later, it's not going to be worth anything. So when they say an eye for an eye, it's saying whatever the reasonable compensation at the time would be. So it was a much better way to term it than to put a monetary value on it in an inflationary era. Any other comments? Then let's go on to Beno Jacob at the bottom of page 33 on the right. Now, Beno Jacob is also interesting. He is a German Jewish Reform rabbi who lived, as you can see, died in 1945. He was German. He escaped the Nazis right before the war. His son is still alive, who's now 95 or 100, and is a retired Reform rabbi, very prominent one, Walter Jacob, in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So Beno Jacob, I believe I have his commentary. I have his commentary to Genesis in the other room. So let's read about him. Who'd like to read? Bottom right-hand corner, page 33. Don't all volunteer at once. Okay, Riva.
Yeah, Rabbi Beno Jacob, a modern biblical scholar, suggests that those who built the tower failed because their goals were wrong. They had mastered the art of brick making, of molding and heating the clay, but instead of using their new technology to improve living conditions in their city, to create a housing for the poor, sick, and aging, they decided to use all their resources and efforts to build the highest tower in the world. They reasoned that their high tower would bring them fame and glory. They wanted others to say, look what they have done. Their terrible mistake was to use their technology for pride and vanity instead of using it to improve the quality of life in their society. Can't resist mentioning the date of Beno Jacob, 1862 to 1945. What a coincidence in Germany. Do you want me to read the block?
No, so stop there. I mean, this reminds me 100% of North Korea, right? So they've got a population that's on the verge of starving, but they spend most of their money trying to build missiles and nuclear weapons and stuff like that. Rochelle.
And in that regard, we can almost say that that is true for pretty much every government. Even our government takes its security and weapons and things a lot more seriously than it does, basically the welfare of the people in a sense. We'll spend billions of dollars for, machinery and things to win wars, but not billions and billions of dollars to win the war in our own land.
And what 10 years ago, I might have thought what Rochelle's saying is a little bit over the top. Now I think it's understated, if anything. It's just really unbelievable, isn't it? And, it's true. Unfortunately, you think one government's bad, but another government doesn't do that. And then you realize they're all doing that.
And I love our government. I just want to say I am a huge lover. I'm a daughter of the American Revolution. I love this country. I vote in this country. I support this country. I'm just saying everybody's got a dark corner. Ours is no different.
Sai, unmute.
He's still fighting with his
Yes,
mute.
I don't quite know why he knows how to unmute and then he doesn't know how to unmute. All right, Sai, we'll have to come back to you when you can unmute. I'm sorry. So here we have Abravanel and Benno Jacob. They both have very different views. Let's move to the next page. We're going to skip the box.
Sai is unmuted.
Okay, Sai.
You hear me now?
Yes.
No, my comment was that I think it's ridiculous for the modern commentator to take an attitude that was impossible to even think about 3,000 or 4,000 years ago. I mean, this man is talking about a building for the good of the people and having housing and all this kind of stuff. I mean, this never existed 3,000, 4,000 years ago. Nobody thought of it. Slavery was the issue of the day, and that's the way people live their lives. These are things that people come up with now, and it's easy to do it now, but we got to take ourselves back to the time of when we think the Torah was written and immerse ourselves in that kind of an attitude.
Well, you could. There's different views here. So, Sai, you can take us back to the times in which the Torah was written, or what I suggested 5 minutes ago, we could ignore the actual time of the Torah was written and worried about the time of the commentators, where we're not really concerned about the original story. We're concerned about how it's interpreted later. So you could look at it either way. You don't have to go back to the times of the Bible. Is okay. Who'd like Riva, you want to read page 34, left-hand column, according to the ancient rabbis. This is basically describing an attitude expressed in the rabbinic literature.
According to the ancient rabbis, the creation of the tower was a huge project. They report that because there were no natural stones with which to construct the tower in the plain of Shinar, it was necessary to invent a special process of baking the bricks. Hundreds of people were required to run the furnaces where they baked. Hundreds of others were needed to prepare the material. Thousands were needed to carry them from the location of the baking furnaces to the base of the tower. Thousands more were employed to carry them up the steep steps that reached high into the sky. It did not take long before the project became more important than the health or safety of those who were involved in it. People were enslaved as laborers. Individual rights and liberties were taken away. The building of the tower and the achievement of fame for the community became justification for brutality and the end of individual freedom. Bricks became more important than the individual liberties or lives. The Italian Torah commentator, scientist, and philosopher Obadiah Sforno who lived through the bitter times of the Inquisition when Jews suffered and were often put to death for their differing religious views, criticized a generation of tower builders for another reason. Their real crime, Storno argued, was not simply the way in which they built the tower, but it was also in what they sought to accomplish by its creation. Their goal, Storno explained, was one religion for everyone, one point of view on the world, one accepted political way of doing things. The tower builders believed their difference of opinion, controversy, and diversity of belief was dangerous and unacceptable. They opposed freedom of thought or discussion. Those who questioned their views or authority were to be crushed, according to Saforno. When God saw that the tower builders were crushing freedom of thought and discussion, it became necessary to intervene and to scatter human beings throughout the world. As we can see, the commentators found many important explanations for God's destruction of the Tower of Babel. The project produced jealousy and mean competition, a misuse of technology, and a cruel disregard for the worth of each individual life. It fostered a false patriotism and ultimately threatened the loss of freedom. Could it be that God actually saved humanity from catastrophe by destroying the tower and dispersing us with different languages and traditions to all corners of the earth? Perhaps the real message of the Torah story about the building of the Tower of Babel has to do with helping us understand that our differences in language, culture, and tradition all represent significant strengths and blessings for humanity.
Ah, okay. Saforno, Italian, another Italian or an Italian. What does he say? And Pam.
Well, diversity is good. Nazis had learned that, we'd be in a better place.
What does that mean, diversity, Pam?
Yeah, he said that there should be, instead of everybody, they should be allowed to have a, it didn't have to be one religion or one point of view or one political way of doing anything. We could have a diversity of thought.
Okay, so this is what both the right and the left are against, right? So the extreme right and the extreme left both want a certain uniformity of ideology. There's one way to think, and that's our way, and we want to either encourage or coerce the entire population to go along with us, or we'll get rid of them one way or the other. Marcia.
All these stories just seem to be like everybody trying to explain probably poor construction. I mean, you've gotten now 3 or 4 explanations just by the rabbis sitting around saying, well, maybe it's this and maybe it's that. It doesn't make sense anymore. I mean, it's just getting, another version of the story going on. It's belaboring it.
But I like this. I mean, this is what I like, that we can take a story and interpret it in different ways. It doesn't have to be conclusive or authoritative. I enjoy this process. Barry. You got on mute.
There we go. Okay, so I'm with Cy. I'm with Marcia. Here, let me read this to you. Their goal, Sforno explained, was one religion for everyone, one point of view on the world, one accepted political way of doing things. How the heck does he know?
All right, so
he's not saying that as a supposition. He's saying that as fact. He says, He says their goal, explained, Sforno explained, was ABCD, what I just read. How does he know that? And going back to what Cy said, they didn't use their technology to build rest homes for the aging. I would be willing to bet they took better care of their aged, their elderly, than we take care of ours, because everybody stayed in the family. They didn't need nursing homes. They didn't need, oh gosh, I wish I could just, how do these guys know this? Where are they pulling this from?
all right, well, I've got Marcia and Barry and Cy all breathing down my neck here, but I mean, I guess we could do a little bit more research into any particular comment. And Sai has been urging us to try to learn more about the actual historical circumstances and sociology of these ancient societies, so we know to what degree any particular comment reflects actual reality. I enjoy the process, I guess. I enjoy these ideas. I don't take them too literally. I don't take them as historical statements, so I don't worry as much as some of you whether they're actually true or not. You know, I kind of like that, but we could definitely delve deeper and try to see, does Sephorno know what he's talking about, in terms of ancient Babylonian culture or not? So we
But where
could
would we
go.
look to find, where would we look to find that information? It's
Well,
all
that's-
supposition.
Well, there are historians of ancient Babylonia, and I did, under Sai's prodding in the last number of months, I did find a couple books where they have like the cultural background of the Bible. I found an ebook on that, where they try to give some of the background to biblical stories and statements. I don't think I referred to that so much this week, but you can see in the Encyclopedia Judaica article on the Tower of Babel that it tries, the Encyclopedia Judaica is not a form of biblical exegesis. So anything that the Encyclopedia Judaica writes, they're concerned with actual historical fact. So it's a very different approach than what we take. For me here in this group, it doesn't matter if something's historically true or not. It matters whether there's an idea there that we can play around with. So I guess it depends how what aspect of biblical exegesis is important, to a given person and in a given situation. Bernie.
Are these commentators any different in reality than all the comments in the Talmud?
No,
I got a bunch of guys sitting under trees making pronouncements.
Well, the rabbis in Talmud were potentially biblical interpreters, so no. But maybe let me take it back to philosophy. I guess what we're interested in this story is, are there certain philosophical ideas that may emerge from this story that are true in a philosophic sense? So does unification for a project potentially lead to goodness or to evil? I mean, that's kind of a question that transcends historical fact, that it doesn't really matter what was happening in Babylonia.
That's not a black and white question.
But it's a philosophic question that can be asked in a theoretical context, can group activity increase goodness, or does it increase evil? Or what would be the factors that you need to take into account? Let's say
Rabbi, it goes both ways. You can argue both points successfully.
Yeah, which I guess is the point. Yes. So yeah, Pam.
I mean, as Jewish people, we take pride in the fact that you put 3 Jewish people in a room, you get 3 different opinions. I mean, and that whole thing on this Torah thing, that's the interesting part about it. We have all these different commentators going from different approaches, and it makes it interesting.
But I think Sai, Marcia, and Barry are saying that we may want commentators who are basing their comments on as much historical accuracy as possible. And it seems that at least some of them, and probably all of them, are not doing that they're prejudging it based on their own maybe their own predetermined values, which I think has some interest, but it also misses what actually was happening. Pam.
Yeah, but Rabbi, you tell us that we should not treat the Torah as a history book of, definite history. So, we should take it as a more general thing, but so.
But if Seforno is arguing that the builders of the Tower of Babel felt a certain way or had a certain policy,
Yeah.
Sy, Barry, and Marshall all argued in different ways that we want to know if this is based on something historical, or is this person just making up this assumption?
Or a little of both.
Benita has a comment.
Benita and then Rochelle.
I don't really have a comment right. I do have a comment, but I'm not gonna. I have a doctor's appointment. I don't want to be rude by leaving without telling you that I'm leaving.
Okay, bye, Benita.
What are the times of this? 11 to what?
11 to 12:30 every Wednesday.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you. I'm sorry about that.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Rochelle, and then Miriam, and then whoever else. Rochelle.
I think when we look at something that was a big project, and let's take the Tower of Babel, the only way a tower successfully will be built, or any project will be completed, is if at one point there was a common mind and a common interest. So I think that all of these people are probably right. There had to be. They all are there, and they're saying the same things just in different ways. But that's what makes life interesting. Every person with every thought in every regard, but it makes it common when everybody's doing it for the same purpose. So these people are all doing it for the same purpose.
But it seems to me that it makes life more interesting to have lots of groups with lots of languages, lots of cultures. But you could argue that the Tower of Babel story is saying that that was punishment for people being bad, and that it would be better if everyone had one culture, one language. So let me take a vote here. How many people think it's better to have all sorts of different groups with different languages and different cultures? And how many people think it's better, whatever better means, if we'd have one language, one culture? Okay.
There's only one North Korea for a reason.
Miriam, comment. Go ahead, Miriam.
Bottom line is that we will never know, but it is, as you say, a good thing to discuss.
Bernie.
All of this reminds me of a story about the yeshiva decided they needed to get into athletics. There was just too much book study. So they decided they were going to take up rowing. And every contest they entered, they lost. So they sent one guy down to the river to watch the other school practice and figure out what they were doing wrong. And he came back and he made a report. I think I know what our problem is. When they're out there rowing, they have 10 guys rowing and one guy yelling.
And you know that little thing where you whisper in somebody's ear, where you tell them something, and by the time it gets to the end, it's completely different.
Right,
Gossip or telephone chain, yeah.
Sy, last comment, and then over to Steve.
What I want to say is that if we realize that people have written a book, people of different times and different ideas, then it's easier for us, I think, to be able to discuss it rather than to take what we read literally and base our whole discussion on that. And that makes a big difference.
Okay. Back to you, Steve. And We're going to be out on the next Wednesday. We're going to meet in the back in the parking lot of the temple to start construction of our own Tower of Babel. And if that doesn't work, we're going to try to build an ark.
Ah, okay.
Round or ship-like?
We're
Oblong.
gonna,
I'm waiting for rain.
we're going to rely upon our engineers, which is cats and cats.
All right, let us conclude with the blessing.
Baruch atah
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher natan לנו Torah emet, v'chayei olam v'tah b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai, Torah. Blessed is Adonai our God, ruler of the universe, who has given us the teaching of truth and planting within us eternal life. Blessed is honor, giver of the Torah. Have a wonderful week, everyone, and be safe.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye.